This video was made possible by PIA VPN. More on this in a moment. The Tariff Man. That is precisely the nickname Trump gave himself more than 6 years ago during his first presidency.
I am a tariff man. When people or countries come in to raid the great wealth of our nation, I want them to pay for the privilege of doing so. It will always be the best way to max out our economic power. We are right now taking in billions in tariffs. Make America rich again.
Trump has been warning us for years quite clearly that he's not exactly what you would call a fan of the free market or free trade. Libertarian Javier Milei's surprise friend clearly says that trade is plunder. The way he puts it, the numbers, as he understands them, are not favorable to the United States. Although there's a lot to be said for that. You only have to think of all the products made by US companies that are consumed in the rest of the world. Those profits, along with all the savings that are channeled to the United States to buy stocks, debt, and all kinds of financial products, do not appear in the trade balance, but obviously they are there. Be that as it may, free trade these days is key to American industry, and unless Trump has in mind to impose a disastrous Peron-like import substitution policy, that's not going to change. Nevertheless, do you know which country could be one of the next to be punished by this wave of tariff threats? Well, with 60% of the semiconductor market share, we have Taiwan, the world's leading manufacturer, and with 20% of global production, we have South Korea, which is the second largest international manufacturer. Why am I saying this? Well, take a look at this news item.
President Trump proposed up to 100% tariffs on semiconductors made in Taiwan while criticizing the bipartisan CHIPS Act, which has already spurred over $450 billion in investments in America's semiconductor and electronics sectors.
Not 10, not 25, not even 50. Trump has said he's willing to impose 100% tariffs on semiconductors manufactured outside the United States. Chips that paradoxically feed the brains behind the products of Silicon Valley technology companies, many of which supported him in his campaign. And that's not all. These days, another key global industry has also been targeted. I'm referring to this one.
Korean steelmakers on edge as Trump unveils 25% tariff plan.
South Korea is the 6th largest steel producer in the world. For example, it is the largest steel mill on the planet, with more than 4,000 workers and a surface area of more than 8 million square meters, which is quite something. And not only that, it is also the world's 2nd largest semiconductor manufacturer, just behind Taiwan. So both the steel and especially the semiconductor tariffs seem to be aimed directly at Seoul and not just Taipei. Nevertheless, in this video, we're going to focus on the Taiwanese island. Now, what exactly does all this imply? And is this going to mean an economic debacle for these two countries? Well, let's not go so fast. This steel tariffs thing was already done by Trump during his first administration. And back then, the South Koreans already agreed to a quota system, whereby the export of their South Korean steel to the United States was limited, a system that is still in place. It was a punishment both for the South Koreans, who were no longer able to do more business with the Americans, and also for the Americans themselves, who had, of course, to replace that steel with more expensive local production, which in turn raises the prices of final products and reduces their competitiveness, both at home and in international markets. Naturally, then they complain about the trade deficit. Trump stuff. But okay, I know. Josh, wasn't this supposed to be about microchips? Well, you see, these two tariff programs may end up looking more similar than you might think. What if the threat of 100% tariffs on semiconductors is really about limiting the import of foreign chips, particularly from Taiwan to the US? Would this be a brilliant idea to boost semiconductor production in the USA, or would it be a savage one that could cause brutal damage to the competitiveness of American industries, such as the technology industry or the automotive industry? Well, in this video, we're about to answer these and many more questions. You can be sure that there is a lot to cover here. But before we dive into the full picture, let's talk about protecting your own digital security with PIA VPN. Using the internet without PIA is like sending a letter without an envelope. Everyone along the way can read your message, see where it came from, and where it's going. PIA's VPN is like a secret tunnel for your internet connection. Instead of sending your data out in the open, a VPN hides your real location and encrypts your information, making it harder for hackers, websites, and even your internet provider to track what you are doing online. PIA VPN is the world's most transparent VPN provider, with over 30 million downloads. They never record or store user data, and it's been proven multiple times in court and by a third-party audit from Deloitte. But there's more. Did you know that streaming platforms like Netflix or Amazon Prime restrict their content depending on your location? With PIA's VPN, you can change your country to any other one of 91 countries in their list, and even one of the 50 US states, and watch any show or movie streaming platforms are are providing. I can finally watch The Gentleman movie, which is unavailable on UK Netflix. PIA is also available across all platforms: Windows, macOS, Android, Linux, iOS, and many more. And you can use one subscription to protect an unlimited number of devices at the same time. Isn't that amazing? And best of all, as a part of the VisualPolitik community, you can grab an 83% discount on private internet access by going to piavpn.com/VisualPolitik. That's just $2.03 a month, with 4 bonus months completely free. Signing up is completely risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. Don't miss out on this chance to protect your privacy now. And don't forget, go to piavpn.com/VisualPolitik to get 83% discount on private internet access for just $2.03 a month, with 4 bonus months completely for free.
The most dangerous tariffs?
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff.
VisualPolitik community. Taiwan is worried, and not without reason. As we've already told you many times here on VisualPolitik, Taiwan's clearly dominant position with semiconductors has been, and continues to be, one of its best safeguards against China. If the Asian giant were to invade the island, this valuable production could be halted, or at least reduced, and then all global production chains of any product you could imagine would suffer a huge ripple effect. Now, let's say, in theory, Trump doesn't get along very well with China. And I say in theory because lately, even on this point, there are doubts. Naturally, we'll be talking about that in another video. So the question is, why such harsh positions towards Taiwan, a strategic ally of both the United States? And why take a similar approach to Uncle Sam's friends in the region, such as Japan?
Trump says Taiwan stole America's chip industry, but that's not true.
Well, hold on a minute. Has Taiwan stolen the semiconductor industry from the United States? Well, if you ask Trump, the answer is, not surprisingly, a resounding yes. But if we look at the data, the story is somewhat different. Taiwan has stolen absolutely nothing. Its rise in the semiconductor industry began in 1976, when its Industrial Technology Research Institute acquired the Radio Corporation of America. From there, the Taiwanese government did what any country with vision would do, to place tax incentives, a competitive workforce, and a strategic commitment that has made it the technological powerhouse it is today. But of course, if we've learned anything from Trump, it's that truth is not an obligation, but, how should I put it, a mere option that is totally expendable if it doesn't fit his narrative. And in this case, his message is clear. They have stolen our jobs, but I will bring them back. And well, it doesn't matter whether or not that's true. What matters is whether voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin believe it. The problem is that in Taiwan, this accusation has fallen like a bombshell, because if the tariffs are ultimately imposed, the island could suffer a real economic earthquake. Being indispensable comes at a price. For years, Taiwan has bet everything on semiconductors to gain global importance. And the truth is that it worked for them. Their industry is crucial and will remain so in the future. But there's one problem. They depend on it too much. Taiwanese governments have long ignored this lack of diversification. And now, with Trump threatening tariffs, the island could be playing with fire. Look at this. Today, more than 40% of its exports are integrated circuits. That is, semiconductors. In other words, a quarter of Taiwan's GDP depends on these small chips. Crazy, isn't it? But what if I told you that that's not the most worrying thing? The real problem lies in who their customers are. Would you hazard a guess to who is one of the largest buyers of Taiwanese semiconductors, if not the largest of all? Exactly, Uncle Sam. 44% of the logic chips and 24% of the memory chips imported by the United States come from this small island. So now imagine the impact Trump's tariffs would have on Taiwan. And here it makes no difference whether we're talking about 25%, 50%, or even 100%. Because any trade barrier could shake the entire supply chain. And remember, this wouldn't only affect semiconductor manufacturers. There is a whole ecosystem of companies on the island that would also suffer along with them. For example, many integrated circuit companies, such as the all-powerful TSMC, are located in the Hsinchu Science Park, the country's most important industrial center. To give you an idea, this park generates more than $360 billion in semiconductor revenues. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but is it really? Well, let me put it another way. That's almost half of Taiwan's GDP. So yes, it is a lot, an extreme amount of money, an absolutely phenomenal amount of money for this island. And not only that, alongside these factories, countries, there are packaging, transport, and energy companies. In short, they are a gigantic economic cog in the wheel. It's therefore not surprising that the Taiwanese government is trying to placate its producers in the face of this threat.
Taiwan considers support for semiconductor industry after Trump's tariff threat. Premier Cho Yong-tai has said the island's government will look for ways to maintain the island's leading position.
Now hold on a minute, because the juiciest part of this story is not how this whole issue might affect Taiwan economically and strategically, but, as we were telling you before, how it might affect the United States itself. Let's return for a moment to Donald Trump's presidential campaign. In those months, the then candidate made promises left and right. Massive deportations, crazy tariffs, less bureaucracy. But among them was another absolutely crucial promise: to reduce the cost of living in the country. To give you an idea, between the beginning of 2020 and the end of 2023, the prices of basic necessities such as water, electricity, and rents rose by an average of more than 20%. Well, Trump, in fact, won the election in good measure by promising everything to fight rising prices. Something that is still very much alive in the minds of Americans. But what if I told you that his tariff plan, including the semiconductor hit, could make the situation worse? As we've told you in past videos, tariffs are not actually paid by Taiwanese companies in this case, nor by Taiwanese people. They are paid directly by US importers, which means that consumers will end up paying the price, as they will face higher prices. It's basically a disguised tax. It's the Trump tax. And yes, this would also happen with semiconductors. But let's not kid ourselves either. Along with consumers, Uncle Sam's tech giants would also be among the biggest losers.
Trump's threat of Taiwan chip tariffs could give Nvidia a fresh headache after DeepSeek.
Many US companies rely heavily on Taiwanese semiconductors, so if tariffs go up, their entire production chain could be affected. We're talking about all of them, from Boeing to Microsoft to Lockheed Martin itself. Local production of final goods and services would be punished, despite the fact that this is supposedly what Trump wants to encourage. But can you see what would be the result of these tariffs? First, the profit margins of these companies would be reduced and their shares could fall. Second, they would probably have to raise the prices of their devices and services, which, of course, would lead to lower sales, and in turn, lower profits. And it's back to square one. In fact, many experts are already warning that these tariffs could lead to a mass exodus of production plants out of the United States, rather than the other way around. Basically, because the big tech companies need to continue to access Taiwanese chips without these cost overruns. But let's put ourselves in the best case scenario for Trump. Would that immediately solve the cost of living problem and start creating thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of jobs, even though the country is already at full employment? Well, no, it's not at all clear that this would happen. You see, it takes 3 to 5 years to build chip fabrication plants. In fact, to give you an idea, TSMC started its first plant in Arizona in 2020 and has just started producing advanced chips now, almost 5 years later.
For the first time ever in our country's history, we're making leading-edge 4-nanometer chips on American soil, American workers, on par in yield and quality with Taiwan. That's a big deal. Never been done before. Never in our history.
In other words, it would take years for US production to reach Taiwan's level, and that's if it ever managed to approach those levels. And this is precisely why tariffs could be a shot in the foot for the US economy. In the very long term, they might be able to increase chip production, but along the way, they would generate years of suffering and enormous costs for both consumers and companies. By the way, do you know who would benefit the most from all this? Exactly, the People's Republic of China. It would be like a gift for Xi Jinping. And yes, obviously, the hardest hit would be the other China, the still officially Republic of China. In other words, Taiwan. But what if we were to tell you that Taiwanese companies are listening to Trump's message? What if the island itself was endangering its huge technology business and even its own independence more than Trump himself? Well, pay attention to what we're about to tell you, because I think you're going to be very surprised.
Taiwan is somewhat to blame.
Okay, we just told you how Trump's semiconductor tariffs could be a devastating blow to Taiwan. But what if I told you that the island's biggest problem is not occupying an office in Washington, but sitting right at home? Yes, that's correct. Taiwan not only suffers from external pressures within its own territory, there have also been political decisions that have pushed its companies to seek refuge in other countries. Earlier, I told you about TSMC, the crown jewel of the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. Well, this technological giant is already making moves and investing billions, not only in the United States, but also in countries such as Japan and Germany.
TSMC lifts chip investment in Japan above 20 billion USD. Taiwanese semiconductor maker, seeking to reduce geopolitical risk, plans to add second plant with help from Toyota.
Germany, for example, has a plan to produce 20% of the world's semiconductors locally by 2030, in collaboration, precisely, with TSMC, which has committed to huge investments in exchange for subsidies and tax advantages of all kinds. But of course, the question many of you are probably asking right now is, why do Taiwanese companies seem so keen to stop expanding their factories in Taiwan and take them offshore? Well, keep one thing very much in mind. Political and military risks with China are not the only reason. In fact, they may not even be the main culprit. If there is one thing the semiconductor industry needs, it's energy. Lots and lots of energy. Plenty of energy, available at all times, and cheap. To give you an idea, TSMC alone consumed 6.4% of all electricity in Taiwan in 2021. And now, in 2025, it is estimated that this percentage could reach 12.5%. In other words, 1 out of every 8 megawatts generated in Taiwan will go directly to TSMC. And that's truly outrageous. In fact, it's right there, in this huge energy demand, where the great political problem arises. Look at this.
Taiwan shuts second to last nuclear plant in controversial shift. Decision could make island more dependent on energy imports. Taiwan aims to decommission last reactor by May next year, 2025.
Just at the moment when it needs more energy, and when it's experiencing more tensions with China, Taiwan is closing its nuclear plants. And with it, they are losing a cheap and reliable source of supply. In other words, they're following the same steps as Merkel's Germany. Really, Taiwan? We admire the achievements of this country, but isn't this shooting yourself in the foot? VisualPolitik community, up until a few years ago, the country had 3 nuclear reactors that provided a stable supply of electricity. But in 2021, the government suddenly organized a referendum, and the majority of the population voted against starting up a 4th plant that had been under construction for 15 years, which naturally meant a lot of money and effort thrown down the drain. And today, despite the fact that almost 60% of the population now supports nuclear energy, Taiwan will close its last atomic power plant in May. Well, the fact is that given such a situation, there is yet another question. What on earth has this island been supplied with all these years? Well, it's true that nuclear energy never represented a very large part of the Taiwanese energy mix, but it still brought a certain stability, lower prices, and energy independence. In fact, Taiwan has even experienced power outages and rationing due to high energy consumption and the lack of a secure supply. What's more, the end of nuclear power and the trend to replace it with fossil fuels has further worsened the country's high dependence on the outside world. More than 97% of the island's energy needs come from abroad. This dependence leaves the country completely vulnerable to possible supply interruptions and large price fluctuations. Thus, in recent years, dependence on oil, coal, and gas to produce electricity, resources that Taiwan does not have, as you can imagine, have increased dramatically. For example, it's estimated that in gas reserves, there's only 1 week of guaranteed supply. Crazy. All this places the world semiconductor king in an even more vulnerable position for the future and makes it extremely dependent on international markets. Now, why is this so important? Well, because if China decided to block the supply routes, Taiwan could run out of electricity within a matter of a few days. And don't forget that in 2022, when Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the US House of Representatives, visited Taiwan, China responded with a partial military blockade and exercises simulating an attack on the island. Well, during those days, maritime traffic plummeted, creating a temporary problem in supply chains. If this were to happen on a more serious level, Taipei might find it impossible to get the oil, coal, and gas that drive its colossal chip industry, because it could export the chips temporarily by air, as it already does in part today, but then it could not do the same to buy oil or gas, so it would be left in the dark. And here comes the problem. Taiwan's only remaining source of energy that it could rely on in an emergency is the very one that is currently being shut down. Now, does this mean that the semiconductor tariffs to be imposed may ultimately become something like checkmate for Taipei? Well, listen up.
The end of the Silicon Shield?
For those of you who don't know, the Silicon Shield refers to Taiwan's crucial role in semiconductor production as a kind of life insurance for the country. The idea is that its industry is so absolutely vital and crucial to the rest of the world that not even China would dare to launch an invasion. Why? Well, because an attack on the island would cripple the manufacture of the world's most advanced chips, something that would affect production lines all over the planet, including mainland China itself. Nevertheless, the tariffs Trump is threatening would not only punish Taiwan economically, but could weaken its industry to the point of pushing it to relocate to other countries. And if that happens, Taiwan would lose its best defense against China, leaving Beijing with fewer reasons not to take the step of launching a full-fledged invasion. The funny thing is that this contradicts Trump's strategy in his first term. At that time, he was extremely tough on China, imposing sanctions and trade restrictions left and right, and making all kinds of threats. These days, however, his position seems more ambiguous, so much so that some analysts are asking, is he paving the way for China to take over Taiwan unopposed? And take note, because this time there are many suspicions that Trump is trying to strike a deal with Beijing in exchange for commercial or strategic advantages. But could the Taiwan situation be included in the package? Let's see. I know, it sounds far-fetched, but it really wouldn't be that far-fetched. Let's not forget that China already took the final grasp on Hong Kong's autonomy in 2019, when Donald Trump was president. Perhaps there would be no need for an agreement with China, nor would it be necessary to deliberately sell Taiwan out.
Punishing the island with tariffs could end up accelerating this move by China if the Silicon Shield falls. And beware, if China were to take Taiwan, the impact would go far beyond semiconductors. They would completely control a strategic passage to Japan and the Pacific, the Taiwan Strait. This would deal a severe blow to the naval power of the United States and key allies such as Japan and South Korea in being able to contain China.
In short, what looked like a simple trade war could end up being a masterstroke, or a monumental disaster. With his tariffs, Trump seeks to strengthen US industry and supposedly punish China, but in the process, he may be weakening his biggest strategic ally in Asia, Taiwan. And if the island loses its Silicon Shield, then Beijing will have more incentive than ever to make the ultimate move. Worse, this whole story could weaken the US and its most advanced and value-added industries, which leaves us with a big question mark. Is this a pressure maneuver to force Taiwan into further alignment with Washington? Or is this a miscalculation that could completely change the balance of power in the Pacific? Because if the semiconductor industry leaves Taiwan and the island loses its main life insurance, China has already shown that it's willing to play hardball when it comes to what they consider to be their sovereign territory. So then the big question is, to what extent will the big tech companies, the US allies, be willing to go along with this whole trade war story? You can leave your opinions below in the comments and we will start the debate. But first, very important, if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you soon.